You'll have to pardon the noise. I have a little helper sanding on the floor. Each year for the high school prom, I build something. And then at the end of the night, it's raffled off to the seniors that stayed for the entire dance. The idea being, give them something nice, keep them here, so they're not leaving early, drinking, driving, having sex. At least make them do it afterwards. And this year, the theme is clocks. Well, it's not clocks, but that's their main decoration. And I have this, which as you can see is a clearly broken classroom wall clock that has been discarded. And I have this, which is a diffuser from a broken overhead projector, which has been discarded. And I'm thinking about combining the two. Something like this. It's not getting a really good look down through the camera. Remember when you were a kid and you had those magic eye things you could tip from side to side? It's kind of like that. So I'm thinking that this will sit in a tabletop because I can put a sheet of glass over it and it be small enough to be useful in, say, a dorm. And then this will be a window, and then the clock will be in a box below that. And when you look down, you'll see it spinning super fast. My hope is sort of to remind you to make the most of the time you have here and not waste it. I don't know. Maybe it's too morbid. But it's frickin' cool. Also thinking about a light or something between the two of them. Let's see what happens when I build it. Again, please excuse the noise. My helper's hard at work. This is a cabinet door, and it's part of a whole mess of doors I bought at sort of an auction. A cabinet shop was closing down, and I bought all their display doors. These would be the doors that, I don't know, somebody messed up on for a client and they threw them on the shelf, the ones to show finish, so on and so forth. And this one's alder, and it's pretty nondescript, and it's just your plain old door. And I'm thinking of it becoming the top of the table. So I'll cut it so it's matching all the way around. I'll match the width of this down here at the bottom. And then I'll inset the plastic diffuser very carefully in the top. Somehow. I'm grooving on it so far. Hey, are you grooving on it?
What?
Do you think it's cool?
What?
Just say yes.
What are you doing, Daddy?
Well, we're going to make a tabletop with a clock in it, I think. Is that cool? Thanks, bud.
Must have been like a practice door or something for this cabinet shop. None of the styles were the same size, so it ended up being cut down in a few dimensions. Here I am calculating the depth the router bit cuts so that I can then properly mark out the location for this diffuser. I gave it about 1/4 of an inch. Seemed like a good measurement to me. Here, in order to get my cutout exactly where I want it, with nice straight lines, I'm actually plunge cutting up from underneath on the table saw. This allows you to get a perfectly straight line, though it can leave some pretty weird corners on the backside because, you know, your blade isn't exactly straight up and down. I dealt with that by hand with the chisel. I trimmed up the corners with a jigsaw. It worked nice. My son was quite happy to get what he considered his tabletop out of the center of my tabletop. I think it's purple right now. After making a test cut to confirm my measurements and to fine-tune the depth that I wanted, Then I had at my piece. Now, it didn't route perfectly, and I must have had some measurement issues, so it took a little fine-tuning. But that's okay. It allowed for a very tight fit.
Again, you'll have to excuse the noise. I have my helper and a bit of a cold. The way this saw cuts when you plunge up like that, it doesn't leave even marks. I'm not very happy with my corners. This is the back side, and I've kind of trimmed them up. But even in doing that, I had some chisel slips. See, there's a chisel slip right there. It's just not the best work that I've done. I can hide it, but it kind of disappoints me that I have to hide it. So now we're down to coming up with the back side. Obviously this is in reverse. The clock will be the other way around. With my diffuser, it wants a few inches, but not too many. Maybe 2.5 tops. So what I'm going to do is build a box back here. So I need to figure out the actual diameter of my box, dimensions, so that this thing can drop down. I'll then cut a hole in the box to expose the clock mechanism. So the whole thing will sit like this in a square that fits around it. I'll find a way to make that less crappy. You know, not every idea works out perfectly in your brain. I love the fact that I cut it straight. I love that plunge cut straight. I just wish I'd have used, I don't know, part of me wishes I had used the jigsaw to do the whole thing. Flat black. Oh, that's wonderful, bud. You've turned that off. The inside of the box will be a flat black, and then it'll have some lights, because I would like, lovely. I would like a series of colored LEDs in the edge so that the clock glows. The color I like best would be a good blue or a violet color. I think that would reflect off the clock face nicely.
Daddy,
Yeah?
a longer piece.
Well, Daddy will cut exactly the length of piece that he needs, and there will be some extras. Daddy needs 16 inches. 16 inches by 3 inches, I think, is what we decided on. Sound good?
What are you doing?
I'm making a box to hold the clock thing in.
Clock thing
Yeah. I don't suppose this is 6 inches wide. Ooh, look at that.
on? What?
So there's
There's
17. That'll get me 2. What do we got over here? 17 again. Ooh, we're going to get it out of 2 pieces, bud. Maybe.
No. Make a piece for me.
I will definitely make some pieces for you.
This guy.
I'm sorry, I found I have to mute every shot where the dust collector is running, and I've sped up time because it makes a horrible noise on the high speed. I know this is going to be painted, so I just used drywall screws and filled them with little pegs that I cut and glued into the holes. Why not? To make the legs for the table, I first planed, then cut to length, milled up, and glued some scrap, basically to make square leg blanks. While the legs dried, I went ahead and pocket screwed what will become the table skirting, or Well, it would have become the table skirting had I measured it correctly. It's weird using a cupboard door as a table, and I had this detail. So I decided to accent the detail with some paint in the hopes that it wouldn't look quite so cupboard door-like. I think it looks good. Now back to the table legs. They've dried, and so I cut them down square. And then once I have a uniform square, they get their final length. This is important. And then I use the tapering jig to taper all the ends. Using a pocket jig, I have pre-drilled all the pocket holes. I use a scrap to space it properly. There you can see my scrap spacer. Just something I had lying around. To get my back spacing correct, and then it just gets screwed straight to the legs. You wouldn't want to do it with a huge table, but for a little one like this, it's fine.
Here's the first mock-up. Lets me check scale and proportion, but I do like the proportion. I think the table is fine. Using that jig to put a taper in the legs, great way to lighten them. And a lot of times I only put the tapers on, two 90-degree sides rather than all four legs. You certainly could put them on all four sides, rather. You certainly could have done all four sides, but I typically don't. That leaves the load coming straight down this edge here. So I like it. That's going to look nice.
In the finished table, these details here will be clock faces. And unfortunately, none of the pictures I have of the table they're not painted yet. It has to go to the art department and have that done. The wiring part of this isn't maybe as intimidating as it might look. First, I salvaged some small bundled pair wires out of old Ethernet cables, some dumpster dove stuff. What's nice about those is they have a bundled pair, like I said, nicely twisted together, and they're marked so you can keep polarity straight. LEDs only work with one polarity. And here you can see me test each one and then solder it to my wires, keeping the polarity straight. And there's a lot of easy, quick how to solder, how to work with LED stuff online. Each one of these is then glued to the frame with hot glue in the appropriate location, and I've pre-marked those. And once the glue sets, I then go over the tails of them just to make sure they're really, really held down. It's not complicated at all. Once you have all the LEDs placed, and remember they're very directional, meaning they put a dot of light in front of them, I then went around and carefully bundled all my wires together. There you can see me braiding a pair, so that they form a single continuous cable. You could have daisy chained all the LEDs together, though potentially if one of them failed, they all would go out. I guess it depended on how you daisy chained them. In this instance, each light has its own individual set of wires, so failure on any one of them will not affect either the voltage or the functionality of the rest of them. So just bring all those wires around to one specific spot. Once I've run them to a single location, I strip and bundle all my positives and all my negatives so that I can then solder them together in basically two larger cables. And then you want to test it. It's always good to test as you go along, just to make sure that you don't have a problem. You'd hate to have to take the whole thing back apart. What I found, which was very easy and convenient for me, was a 3-volt wall transformer. Because these are blue LEDs, they will run just fine on 3 volts, meaning I don't have to mess with any resistors, less things to fail. Now I've got that in place, hot glued it down, go around and paint the inside jet black so that nothing but the lights themselves shows. So this is the back plate that the clock actually mounts to. This will be bolted to the square, the light box we just finished making. So I cut it out so that the face itself was centered. Now I need to mark the screw holes. So the way I do that is I put the 2 screws in, and then I tap on the back very carefully, leaving an impression of the screw heads that I can then go back later and find. Otherwise, finding those screws would be a nightmare. After centering up the box on the table frame, I use the biscuit cutter to cut a number of slots. Careful of your wires, obviously. And then I just use regular table clips. Little, tabletop movement clips. Cinch it down. After that, install the clock face, or I guess the back. And you're ready to test it. I'm not sure where I messed up the measurements, but I clearly messed up the measurements. And there's nothing for it but to remake 1/2 of the table skirting. Because in part I had all this extra time to stare at the legs, I realized they could benefit from a little elegance and a little antiquing. Pretty straightforward. I first taped up all the legs so that the untaped area started as a wide wedge running down to almost a point. And then using some cream-colored latex, I paint in my pinstripe. You always start on your tape and brush off of it. That will help prevent, tape undercutting. Then I peel it while it's still wet. Again, just to stop it from trying to wick underneath. Once the paint has had a chance to dry, I relieve the edges a little bit with some rough sandpaper, just to simulate some wear. And then I brush on a little bit of a dark wood stain. This is a red mahogany, so anything would have worked. And then I buff it out. And it doesn't show up on the camera, but I leave it darker towards the feet than the top, like mop splashing. While that's drying, I prepare the top. I just use silicone. I don't know really what else would hold it in place. And carefully set the diffuser in. It looks pretty good. Attaching the top to the base, I'm using the same tabletop clips, so 4 spots with the pocket jig, and 4 tabletop clips which allow wood movement. Not that there's a whole lot with this project, and it's just very convenient. And the last step is to mount the plug. Done. I really enjoyed this project. The tabletop was finished with a spray lacquer. You could use a can. I just used an air sprayer before I inset the diffuser. It does what I hoped it would do. As you walk past it, it boils and bubbles. It magnifies bits and pieces. You can look down inside, and the LEDs have this three-dimensional pyramid shape. When you stand back, it's pointed up. When you get close, it's pointed down. Though the camera kind of fails to pick it up. Regardless, it should be pretty cool. Really, really cool. It should be a good prize, something that'll work well in a dorm room later on, although I don't know how it's going to handle beer pong spills. But I hope you enjoyed watching this. I'm happy to answer any questions. If you enjoyed yourself, could you consider a subscription? Maybe a like? Thanks.